While the Scott Pilgrim graphic novels, Scott Pilgrim movie, Scott Pilgrim comic, Scott Pilgrim game, and Netflix Scott Pilgrim anime all carry the name of our titular protagonist, some of the women in his life are far more popular than him in the fandom. Of course, your first thought is Ramona Flowers, the seemingly manic pixie dream girl on the surface, but with a lot more depth and character growth than you might initially think. But then there's also Kim Pine, the redhead drummer for Sex Bob-Omb and Scott's first not-so-evil ex. But would you believe that her character actually predates the Scott Pilgrim series by around 5 years? Yeah, Kim Pine isn't originally from any Scott Pilgrim property. And neither is Lisa Miller for all the graphic novel fans out there. She predated the franchise too. And so did this random girl from flashback scenes in the comics and Scott Pilgrim vs. the animation. Not a lot of people know that Bryan Lee O'Malley made webcomics, or that he holds them in such high regard. But his time as an indie comic artist is what got him started. And while he's done several series, I want to focus on his short-lived series Style. Or Style Girls, depending on which episode you find. Because as it turns out, a lot of elements in Scott Pilgrim can be found in it. Most notably, 3 characters that were later reinvented. I'm Oro from Zombie Comics, and this is a story about a time before Scott Pilgrim, before even O'Malley's first graphic novel Lost at Sea. It's a story about punk rock chicks, ever-changing hair color, repurposed characters, and Scott Pilgrim precursors. This is the story of Bryan Lee O'Malley's short-lived webcomic Style.
Not so long ago, in the mysterious land of Toronto, Canada.
20-year-old Bryan Lee O'Malley found himself producing webcomics for a website he can't remember the name of back in 1999 and 2000. This webcomic was called Style, and while the name might make you think that the series revolved around fashion, O'Malley point-blank said that the title Style was just meaningless. He was really into this orbital song called Style, and he liked the word. The comic wasn't about fashion. It wasn't really about anything. O'Malley said that the style was aiming to be like the work of Paul Pope, an American alternative cartoonist who was born in Philadelphia and grew up in Bowling Green, Ohio. And while O'Malley draws in a more exaggerated style, you can see the influence Pope had on him, especially when it comes to background shading and colors. The series was set in a high school and followed 3 girls as they got into trouble, dealt with getting sick, bickered among themselves, with very familiar feeling dialogue. O'Malley gives his characters a certain voice, and it's just unmistakably his. In fact, even though there's not exactly an extensive catalog to these comics, there's a lot of small details that would undoubtedly stick out to Scott Pilgrim fans. I mean, besides the obvious art style. Something as simple as the text font used in narration being the exact same as in Scott Pilgrim, or a character wearing a shirt with the name Roxy on it, like Roxy Richter, Ramona's fourth evil ex played by Mae Whitman. The webcomic is really interesting to see how these tiny elements of Scott Pilgrim were forming long before the series even started. Personally, I got caught up on this title illustration of one of the girls sporting a pair of bat wings. Now, I'm not saying this is where O'Malley first had the idea for demon hipster chicks, but again, it's just interesting to view these details retroactively. And the biggest and most interesting, the entire point of this video, being that the 3 girls of these online comics would be reinvented for Scott Pilgrim years later, and obviously looking very different. Can you guess which one's Kim? I guarantee you'll get it wrong. Tell you what, if you get it wrong, you have to subscribe. And if you get it right, please subscribe anyway. And either way, send this to all your ravenous Scott Pilgrim obsessed fans. I don't think there's such a thing as a casual Scott Pilgrim fan. You either hate it with a burning passion or you're way too into it. Nope, Kim's not the pink-haired girl with the punk rockish hair. Kim's actually the one with the black hair. Or brown. Or both? Anyway, she's not a redhead. In fact, honestly, she doesn't look anything like her Scott Pilgrim counterpart. I was checking for anything, like, do we even know if Kim has her ears pierced? She's white in both versions and Canadian, I don't know. Story-wise though, there are some similarities. It's pretty well documented that Scott Pilgrim is very much based on O'Malley's life at the time of its writing. Don't worry, not completely. And he spoke in a bonus page at the back of the first Scott Pilgrim book, Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, saying Scott's cast of characters, the American girlfriend, the unforgettable ex, the gay roommate, the sister, the friends and band members, were all pulled straight from real life. With these comments referring to December 2003, I think it's safe to say that Kim's role in the story was there before Kim herself filled it. O'Malley said that the high school backdrop became the basis for Scott's high school memories, and obviously Kim Pine would be a major Scott Pilgrim character. Is the school and style specifically St. Joel's Catholic High School? Those details are a little on the nitty-gritty side. But the fact is, O'Malley very consciously folded in the idea of Kim Pine in high school into the overall Scott Pilgrim plot. Kim Pine isn't based on anyone, she's a complete fabrication. The name Kim Pine dates back to high school when he was making up a superhero team of X-Men ripoff mutant outcast teenagers. Kim Pine was an angsty goth-like girl whose body sprouted spikes when anyone got too close to her. Like a porcupine. Get it? So there you have it. The earliest version of Kim Pine, the sarcastic red-headed drummer, was a porcupine-themed superhero for a knockoff X-Men team. I can safely say I was not expecting that when I started researching this. I liked the name and the character, so I kept her around and put her in other things. She became a regular high schooler in my short-lived style strip, which I later plundered for Scott Pilgrim's high school past. And she still has a close friendship with Lisa Miller. For those fans who have only seen the live-action Scott Pilgrim movie or Netflix anime, Scott was actually part of a band before Sex Bob-Omb. Multiple, actually. And the first consisted of himself, Kim, and Lisa, and was called Sonic & Knuckles, obviously named after the 1994 Sega Genesis game. And by the time Lisa Miller enters the picture in the comics, you can see that Kim really missed her high school friend. So, who is this pink-haired girl from Style? That's actually Lisa Miller, the character who would go on to become a fan favorite of the graphic novel readers. While she's gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to adaptations, being only mentioned in the live-action movie and getting Mike Wazowski'd in the anime, she played a pivotal role in Book 4, Scott Pilgrim Gets It Together. So when they first met, she and Scott were both new kids, and they became fast friends outside of the principal's office, in a panel that looks almost identical to one from Style. By this point in the series, Scott and Ramona had been dating for about 4 months, but they were, let's just say, moving at a snail's pace. Scott didn't even know Ramona's age, and this is where Wallace tells Scott that it's time to step things up.
Step up your game, Scott. Break out the L word.
Lesbian?
The other L word.
Lesbians?
It's love, Scott. I wasn't trying to trick you.
But Scott being Scott, initiative isn't exactly his forte. And to make things more complicated, Lisa re-enters his life. She and Scott definitely had a lot of sexual tension between them ever since they met. By this time, Scott had already two-timed Ramona and Knives Chow, so now we're sitting here like, is he gonna do it again? Lisa's appearance forces Scott to finally confront how strong his feelings are for Ramona. The Lisa Miller in Style isn't nearly as fleshed out. It's interesting to note, but parts of Lisa Miller in Style would actually end up being folded into Ramona herself, most notably the ever-changing hair color. Ramona's iconic claim that she changes her hair color every few weeks is a defining characteristic for her, and it turns out it wasn't even originally hers. I did say Lisa tends to get shafted in adaptations, but not completely. She did appear in the animated prequel short film Scott Pilgrim vs. the Animation, and even the Scott Pilgrim video game. Although in the game, she's not depicted with blonde hair like in the novels, but with a vibrant pink hair. While I can't confirm that this is a direct callback to the webcomic style, it's more than worth pointing out. Okay, I stumbled across a totally different rabbit hole with these characters after I'd already recorded. So, in some bonus behind-the-scenes Scott Pilgrim pages in Book 2, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, O'Malley gave an even deeper look into the history of the Style Girls. Lisa is descended from an old fantasy character of his called Winged Misa. Out of curiosity, I thought I'd search for this character, and shockingly, I found her. Or fan art of her. DeviantArt user Ariok4 uploaded a sketch of Winged Misa from 1999 that was a gift to Bryan Lee O'Malley, known then online as MAL, of the title character of his then comic project Winged Misa. That led me to alleged actual art from O'Malley of Winged Misa, colored by Jen Chan, but I already know this rabbit hole could take me way too deep for a video about the origins of Scott Pilgrim characters, so I'll just leave my digging there for now. That leaves one last character, the main character of Style, Lauren Wood. She's in Scott Pilgrim too, but I doubt anyone but the most hardcore fans even know where. Yeah, Lauren here was demoted from main character to a mere cameo. Although, just like in Style, she attends the same high school as Kim and Lisa. After Scott rescues Kim from her quote-unquote evil ex Simon Lee, she becomes friends with Lisa and Scott too, so it's literally the Style group. And Scott. Throughout high school, the Sonic & Knuckles band continued to rehearse and perform, and Lauren filled a similar role to young Neil as their #1 fan. She played the same role in Scott Pilgrim vs. the animation, but that's it for her. Though I will say, looking at this picture again, her design seemed to go to Lisa. By the way, if you haven't noticed, I haven't really mentioned their personalities in Style vs. Scott Pilgrim at all. Well, that's because, as O'Malley puts it, it only lasted for a few weeks and was really bad. In these strips, the characters don't really have much of a personality. And so Style ended with only a couple of episodes released. The only 2 comics from the original run I could find was this one called Blind Date and this one called Here's to Jacob. The second of which doesn't include the title card, so it's entirely possible that these might just be 3 similar looking but unrelated characters. I'm sure there were more comics, but it's a difficult series to dredge up. But this initial burst at the turn of the century wasn't the end for Style, somehow. O'Malley actually brought it back again 2 years before he published Scott Pilgrim. With Style ending the first time, Kim Pine, Lisa Miller, and Lauren Wood went into hibernation for about 2 years. He was working on Lost at Sea and had begun sketches for Scott Pilgrim in March of 2002. Later that year is when Style would make a return. Prior to publishing Lost at Sea and Scott Pilgrim, O'Malley started out as a letterer with the Portland-based publisher Oni Press, and it was actually because of his webcomics that he ended up there at all. I strongly believe in webcomics. That's how I started. When I met James at Oni, he had already seen my webcomics. I'd already sent him stuff before I met him in real life, which kinda sealed the deal. Just having yourself on the internet is really cheap and manageable, and it doesn't take a lot of effort, and it's really easy to show people. And then if the right person sees it, or if it catches on, it'll be seen by way more people than you can ever conceive of. And the Oni Press website is where he resurrected Style and its version of Kim, Lisa, and Lauren for one last hurrah. A few years later, I resurrected the title and characters for 3 really goofy comedy strips on the Oni Press website. I think it was 1 per month, and those months were November 2002, December 2002, and January 2003. And from there, that was it for Style. But not for the characters. If you hadn't noticed the overlapping dates, these last 3 Style comics came out well into the development of the first Scott Pilgrim graphic novel. I don't want to get into speculation territory, but it does make you wonder at what point these characters go from their webcomic selves to the much more familiar Scott Pilgrim versions. In these strips, the characters don't really have much of a personality. Since I only did 3, I didn't develop it much beyond silly jokes. The 3rd strip was done when I was sick with a cold, so it kinda sucks, but whatever. Whatever the timeline was, the Kim Pine we ended up with is iconic. I mean, I might be biased being a redhead myself, but she's frequently in lists of the top 5, even top 3 Scott Pilgrim characters. It's interesting to see where she began, what changed, and what stayed the same, even if it was relatively little. So, yeah. I've been Aura from Zombie Comics, and I'll catch you on the flip side. See ya!